We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by Line Movement. It is the division round. We didn't have Harmon last week, a little bit of a scheduling difficulty there, so happy to have him back with us to talk through some wide receivers. Normally we're going through some wide receiver sleepers, some super thin guys at the bottom, telling you guys not to play some of these Jets wide receivers. At least Harmon's telling me not to play the Jets wide receivers. I didn't always listen to him. But you know him from Yahoo Sports. He's at @MattHarmon_BYB on Twitter. Make sure you follow him if you haven't already. Man, we were just talking about it. We might as well just talk about all the best plays on the slate, which happen to be wide receivers in the division round. But before we get there, man, how was your wildcard weekend experience? I know things are a little bit lighter for you this time of year, so I hope you at least enjoyed watching the games.
Oh, absolutely love it. There's nothing better than playoff football, man, not just because it's playoff football. And outside of the Bears, you've got all the best teams out there, but it's also just so refreshing to, not have, if you're me, you're not having a bunch of people assaulting you about your fantasy rankings or whatever that week for their season-long leagues. It's like, let's just enjoy the games. So it's nice, not having to do a Sunday show, then a Sunday night recap podcast. It's good to actually sit back and enjoy the games and just take them in for what they are. And I love the slate this year. I don't know about you, man, but the super wild card weekend, like having these extra games. Yeah, we got stuck with the Bears, but, we get stuck with some crappy teams every now and again in the playoffs, but having the Colts as a part of it in the AFC going against the Bills, I'm so in on this Bills team, man. I mean, I'm a Stephon Diggs guy. I know that you are too now at this point. Like, I was on my feet for the last 20 minutes of that game. I really want this team to do well this year.
I think that's part of this whole experience. Things tail back a little bit. Obviously, DFS is still rolling. There's a lot of stuff going on that you can be doing to kind of speculate on the fantasy aspect of it. But still, we get to sit back. At least for me, I don't get to watch games as closely because Red Zone's on. There's other things going on. There's content. There's late swaps. There's whatever it is. But now I get to actually sit back and watch a full football game at the same time. So watching a guy like Stephon Diggs go out there and just absolutely dominate on the big stage. I mean, I'm really just pulling for this Bills team in general because I think they're a lot of fun. They seem loose. I was pretty heavy on the Ravens overall last week, just across the industry. So I'm kind of bummed that they're playing against each other this week. But yeah, man, it's a great time of year just to be a football fan. Sometimes we get lost a little bit in all the content, the rankings, all that stuff. People getting upset with us on Twitter for basically anything. But yeah, man, it's a good time. I'm excited for this weekend. In particular, I think that it could just basically come down to these elite wide receivers. So we're going to talk through a couple of your favorites. We're going to start with Stephon Diggs, though, 7,300. I know you're always willing to riff on him. Thoughts on him in this spot, specifically, though, against Baltimore?
I feel like going into the playoffs, people were not willing to put the Ravens up as one of the best defenses in the NFL. We hadn't really seen that type of performance when they played good teams. I mean, they had a really soft schedule down towards the end of the year, and really the only good team that they played when they made their playoff run was the Cleveland Browns, and we saw that turn into a back and forth point trading affair. I thought last week would be more of that with the Titans, but their offense they're obviously going to be a little hot and cold, are the Ravens, because of the way that they're built. But I thought the Titans would find more success against their defense than they did. And you could argue some of the play calling or whatever, but I just think their defense stepped it up. That being said, I think this Bills offense is probably going to get the better of this matchup. You look at Stephon Diggs as that vertical player. There were still holes in that secondary. I mean, the biggest one that you could point out was Ryan Tannehill really missed A.J. Brown streaking down the left side of the field on the last play, the interception that he threw that really kind of iced that thing. Targeting, somebody, I think it was Khalif Raymond or something, one of those guys way down the depth chart when his number one receiver is open down the field. I think that was a miss on Tannehill. I think those opportunities will be there for Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs.
Right.
I think this game is going to get very high scoring, and it's pretty tempting to think about, okay, not only Stephon Diggs, but what about, John Brown, Gabe Davis, and some of these other guys. I really like the way this game sets up for fantasy.
Yeah, the Smokey Brown thing, just obviously burning people with that 0 last week. I don't think there's going to be people that want to go back there. I think that my biggest question, Harmon, is that everyone's basically telling me you want to attack Baltimore on the interior. So if Cole Beasley's healthy, he's the guy, but they're moving Diggs around enough, right? And he's this elite talent, right? He can win in any matchup. So you have any concerns that maybe just the pieces don't fit together seamlessly for this Buffalo team? I guess that's my only real worry with the play.
Well, I think that's what's great about Diggs is he is that player you can move around. That's such a good point by you, Joe, because The Ravens also, if they're going to put somebody in the slot, usually it is Marlon Humphrey. Like that could be a situation where he just tracks Diggs around because he's their best corner or whatever. But like I love that Diggs can line up inside some of his big plays too. I don't think they'll be quite as aggressive as the Steelers were in terms of like backing off the defense and just giving those free releases over the middle of the field. But we have seen the Bills use Diggs in that way where they'll get him on rosters. They'll get him on those patterns to get him over the middle of the field and make plays in space. He's not just that vertical threat. You and I know maybe better than anybody at this point that this guy can win at every area of the field. So I got no hesitations with Diggs even in this matchup. Like I said, I think Buffalo, their defense is really susceptible to the way that the Ravens will want to attack you. Think about all of those big plays they let up against the Colts tight ends. That's kind of where Lamar wins, right? Over the middle of the field, that type of passing. We might talk about Marquise Brown a little bit later, but I kind of love the way that the Ravens offense sets up versus the Bills defense. I think that's just going to push the point total in this particular game.
Yeah, you mentioned it. Marquise Brown's 5,200. I think a lot of people are probably going to gravitate towards Mark Andrews in the better matchup, at least on paper. But I guess to tie a bow on Stephon Diggs, 7,300. That's a $700 savings off of Tyreek Hill. That's like over $1,000 savings off of Devontae Adams in a tough matchup against this Rams defense. So definitely think that Diggs is one we're going to be talking about this entire week. But yeah, I'm curious what you think about Marquise Brown at 5,200. I was hoping that maybe they would just price him up a little bit more because I'm still interested. If like the price is one of that actually like fits pretty well, maybe mini stacks with Stephon Diggs, Marquise Brown on the other side. Do you think that's like getting a little bit too cute when Andrews is like clearly the guy that should be eating in this spot?
Not at all, because I love the way they used Brown last week. I feel like I must have said this on your show at different times of the year. I definitely said it on Fantasy Football Live and some of the other Yahoo properties I went on. I harped on it in my weekly columns all the time, but the reason Brown was so unproductive in the first half of the season, beyond some of the mistakes he was making, I always stand up for my guys, and I think Marquise Brown is sort of on the fringe of that territory. He's not at the penthouse suite in like the Reception Perception Hotel, but he's got a key to get in the door for sure. And I want him to be moving up that list at some point. I always stand up for my guys, but at the same time, there's no denying that Brown made some mistakes this year. I mean, some horrible drops, just some real bad situations in the open field, in the contested game, but that's really not his strength. I think they were forcing him into those situations too often. They were overusing him as a vertical threat, similar to a situation that everybody can understand how this has changed in the following year. But like Curtis Samuel with the Carolina Panthers in 2019, just all vertical stuff. However, you think about Marquise Brown, and he's not quite the same player as Curtis Samuel in terms of the build and what he can do as a rusher, but Marquise Brown was a great route runner in college. He was a great route runner in his first season. He can get separation when you use him the right way. And I love the way they started getting him some of those layups. Those were big play arsenals in his portfolio as a collegiate player in Oklahoma, like making plays in space. We saw some of that in this last game. And we saw a lot of that really in the second half of the season when Brown started scoring touchdowns. I think he scored in 5 of his last 6 games. The only game that he didn't score in, he went 98 yards on the Jaguars in a game that the Ravens cruised to. So I like Brown right now. I think he's trending up in this offense. And I think this is the type of matchup, again, if they don't just ask him to go out there and be one of the outside receivers, they move him around to the slot, they put him in the backfield a little bit. He can still win deep. We saw him win vertical passes last week, but I love the way they're using him too. And I think the Dez Bryant signing is kind of key for this, because they can put Dez and Boykin on the outside and then put Brown sort of in those situations to get more layup targets. I think that's been a big boost to his production. I expect it to continue this week against the Bills.
It's a really interesting price tag for sure. So definitely going to kind of see where ownership drops on him as this week progresses. I can't let you get out of here without talking about Tyreek Hill though, Matt, because he's AK. He's really expensive. The Browns did activate Denzel Ward from the COVID list. So it's going to be an interesting way to see how they try and, limit Tyreek Hill in this spot. Do you think that it's a decent spot to go back to Hill at 8K? Is it just going to be Travis Kelce season? I'm curious, I guess, in general, this spot against the Browns for Tyreek.
There's only so much you can do. Right, and trying to limit a player like Tyreek Hill. I love the way the Chiefs set up against this Browns secondary. You mentioned it. They bring back Denzel Ward. That's fine. They still have a lot of holes at slot corner. They still have a lot of holes at safety. Not a lot of team speed on the back end there. Basically, if Myles Garrett doesn't play like an absolute superstar, and he has played like a superstar for much of this year, their defense is kind of banged on that back end. So I like Tyreek Hill a lot. He's priced up. I get it, but it makes a ton of sense for him to be one of the core plays this week because of that matchup. It's a team speed issue. Every time someone lines up against Tyreek Hill, it's a team speed issue. But I think especially against this Browns defense, the Steelers were able to obviously create some passing numbers last week, and it wasn't always just necessarily in that dink and dunk fashion that they did, even though it took Ben Roethlisberger, I think, a career-high 68 passes to get over 500 yards. I think you still saw enough that there are some holes in this defense that can be exploited. I just think Patrick Mahomes and these guys will be doing it from the whistle blow as opposed to like 30 minutes down 28 points in the first half like the Steelers were.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a completely different situation than the Steelers offense. So that if they get that far behind, it's going to be a big problem. So I think that what's kind of been benefit, obviously, and Reeves mentioned this on the last segment, but like Travis Kelce, elite talent, all that stuff. But the fact that like people just refuse, or at least try to refuse, to let Tyreek Hill beat them deep. So they're just sitting back. There's just all this space in the middle for Travis Kelce. So that's obviously the largest total on the entire slate on the implied side, but also we do expect that game to shoot out in comparison to a couple of these other lower scoring games. So we'll wrap with this, Harmon. We'll keep it pretty tight here. Godwin and Thomas, they're priced similarly, 6,100 for Godwin. Michael Thomas is 6,700 in game number 4. Curious your thoughts on how you think that Thomas looked last week. Wasn't used a ton, but did get in the end zone. And then Godwin just left a ton of air yards on the field in this one. Godwin, 12 targets, only 5 catches for 79 yards, kind of saves that day with the touchdown. So do you have any preference between these guys? Because I know both of them are kind of in your guys. They're definitely ones that are probably in the hotel with you, maybe not in the penthouse. I love that. I'm gonna borrow that from you for sure.
I don't know where the hell that came from. That's the first time I think I've ever made a hotel reference when talking about the players that I like. Who knows, man? It's the end of the regular season. You know, we're all transitioning into off-season mode. But let me tell you what, Chris Godwin, you know, he's not a mistake player, but he's another guy, made some drops, missed some opportunities in that game against Washington. That's really not who he is. You know, he's not a guy where that's something that we talk about very often. I think the fact that Brady went to that connection right away, I think that says something. In this matchup against the Saints, I think you do kind of want to pick on them on the interior of the defense when they've struggled this year. And I think the Saints have played extremely well. They struggled in the early parts of the year, covering tight ends, covering slot receivers. You know, Aaron Rodgers absolutely destroyed them when they matched up the first time earlier this year. And I wouldn't be surprised if Tampa Bay does that as well. You know, and it's interesting when we compare these two quarterbacks. I think this is why I come down on Chris Godwin's side, even though it's more crowded in Tampa Bay than New Orleans. Honestly, right now, we talk about this as a matchup of like these old men quarterbacks. Really, only one of them is playing like an old man. When we go back and look at the numbers from Brady's season with the Bucs, I think we're all going to be surprised that this statistically was one of his better seasons. I just want to invest in this Bucs passing game right now. I don't mind if you stack Brady and Godwin or Brown or whatever, and then you run it back with Thomas because that Tampa Bay secondary has made some blown some coverages, and even Taylor Heineke, ODU's finest, was looking pretty decent against them last week. I think that the core of your plays should be around these Bucs wide receivers and not on Thomas.
It's going to be a fun week to watch some of your guys at the wide receiver position this week, Matt. So I appreciate
Hotel's going to be partying, man. We're going to we're going to have a cleanup crew come Monday morning. That's for sure.
Well, you better get it out of your system, man, because I know you're going to be in the lab very soon, just locking yourself in a room, charting wide receivers for reception perception. So it's something that I always look forward to each and every offseason for sure. Going to be tailing you, probably buying some sports cards for basically everyone you like, and just going from there, man. That's the play. Anything else you want to talk about, Matt? That's all I got, man. I appreciate the time.
No, Joe, I appreciate it. I think this is going to be another great weekend of football. Like, we're in a time, especially in the AFC, where like I could be cool with any of these teams winning the Super Bowl, man, and that always feels pretty good. I'm looking forward to this weekend.
Good stuff, man. Enjoy the games. Talk to you soon.
Thanks a ton, Joe.